Good afternoon. My name is Maureen Freely. I'm the chair of the Translators Association. Can you all hear me? Too well, I guess. Yeah, okay. I'll get back here. And I'd like to introduce Roz Schwartz, who's also been very, very active in the Translators Association and is now, are you the chair of the PEN Writers in Translation? And also the translator of The Little Prince, yes? Most recently. Now, we want to spend this, devote most of this half-hour session to your questions. So we're going to keep our own introductions very, very short. And I'm just going to begin by asking Roz a question, which is, how did you become involved in translation, Roz?
I don't know if I should tell you the answer.
Yes, you should. Yeah.
Basically, I dropped out of university. I ran away to Paris, where I lived for 8 years. I came back to England and found that I was completely unemployable. And the only thing I could do was speak French. So I launched myself as a translator and learned everything by doing it wrong. So this is not advice on how to become a translator, but it does help, I think, to have lived in a country for a certain number of years. It's not just about knowing a language. As a translator, you act as a bridge between different cultures. You need to really know and understand a culture profoundly in order to translate, so that when you have a dialogue, you need to know exactly what social milieu the people speaking come from. You need to understand different registers, who says things in what context. So although the way I went about it was not what I would advise anyone else to do, I would say spend time in a country and also doing all sorts of different things, actually having experience of different environments. When I was in France, I did all sorts of weird jobs. I worked in an office. I worked for the railways on their phone answering system. I picked grapes. And all of this, although I didn't realize it at the time, was the best possible training for being a literary translator. So I think really, get a life and then think about being a translator.
I would agree
What
that
about you, Maureen?
almost all of the things that ended up being very important when I finally came around to translation were things that I did for silly reasons when I was supposed to be doing something else. And the wonderful thing about becoming a translator is suddenly all these mistakes, all these false turnings, with perfect career planning.
Yeah. I mean, I think it has to be said that when we were sort of doing those things, there weren't translation studies courses or translator training. There was really no training for translators at that time. So.
So you don't have the option of being badly behaved like us. There are other ways of going about it. Do any of you have any questions? If so, I'll direct the microphone to you so that everybody can hear you. Anybody have a question yet? Yeah. Over here.
Hi there, my name is Gisela. I have a short story that I'd like to translate from English into German. It's an Australian author and she hasn't been published in German yet. What's the best approach you think? I'm sure there's more than one to go about having that published or going further, publishing maybe a novel that she wrote as well.
Did you hear?
Yeah. Do you want me to answer?
Well,
the first thing you need to do is check out the rights situation. With any translation, somebody owns the rights, the translation rights for that book or story. It could be the author, it could be the publisher who published it in the original language. So before you do anything, you need to check out with the rights holder if they would be happy for you to translate it with a view to finding a publisher. That's always the first step. Now, if it's the author, they'll probably be delighted that you want to translate their story, but that's the first thing to do.
Hello. Well, my question is similar to hers. Actually, I'm the author, and I'm living in Austria. My book is in English, and I want to translate it into German. My German is not that good that I am able to actually translate it so others understand it.
Well, I think we need to get you in touch with the person behind you. You can have a conversation afterwards. And I would say that one of the best things you can do if you want to come into translation is actually to come to events like this, because we are hanging around, but we are all interested in the same thing. And over the past 2 days, over and over again, I'm talking with somebody and saying, well, you should speak to so-and-so, and they're right over there.
Yeah.
Could you give a little bit more information about the book that you want to have translated?
Actually, when you both introduced, you made your introduction, is actually my book. My book is about my pains of my past actually turning out to be the
good
power for the future.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
exactly that,
Yeah.
and to share that with others. And
Yeah. Is there?
Can I just add
Yeah.
something to what Maureen said? You would always have translators always work into their mother tongue, so you wouldn't expect to translate into German if that's not your mother tongue. You would need a mother tongue German translator.
However, I would add, because I should explain that I do a lot of other things. I'm a novelist myself. I used to be a novelist, and now I'm a novelist in my own right because I'm a translator and more successful as a translator, and also a journalist, and also I teach writing. I run the writing program at Warwick. And so I have a lot of students who really do have two languages and who are writing. They might come from, they might be Serbian, they might be Romanian, they might be Turkish, they might be Greek. But they are working as writers, as young writers in the writing program in English. And because of my interest in translation, I try to encourage them to carry on writing in their own language. So I think there are possibilities. As long as nobody ever makes me go in the other direction, I think that then it's fine. Yes. You can't.
you want the meaning of what you're trying to relate to be the same.
Not necessarily.
Maybe not.
Yeah, we can have that conversation later. Yes. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, first
Okay,
of
we'll
all,
come to you in a minute.
I could say that I can translate yours because I'm bilingual in both languages, German and English, and that's indeed the directions. But my question really is, I'm currently based in Germany. I try to get into literary translations there, and I find it very much a closed circle. And so I'm going to relocate. And how do you actually get into literary translation? I do loads of translations. Some of them just earn me the money. Others are really interesting. And sometimes I even get my name published with them. But that step upwards.
Could I ask a question? What would count for getting into literary translation for you?
Well, obviously, the more I identify with the content, the better the outcome will be, because whatever you love doing, you'll do your very best for.
So, do you mean that you want to be in the network so that you're able to choose books and take them to publishers? Do you mean that you'd like to make a living out of it? We have to give a warning about the living part, don't we?
I know you don't get rich with translations. I know that, and I confirm the do lots of stuff before you become a translator. It helps.
Yes, yeah.
But anyway, now just to get a foot into that other part of translations.
Well, I mean, I think that we could give advice for London and with this island anyway. Yes. And do you want to speak to that because you've been involved in these networks longer?
Okay, I think there are several ways. One, I think, is there are summer schools and mentoring courses. I'm going to tell you about two summer schools. One that is run by the British Centre for Literary Translation, and we have the programme's director, Daniel Hahn, standing at the back there, wave. So if you want to talk to Danny about the summer school at the British Centre for Literary Translation, that's a very good place to start. That's the 22nd to the 27th of July. And these courses are tutored by practicing translators. And I think that, one of the things I would say about the Translator Network is that it is a very supportive group of people, and established translators very often mentor people who are starting out and help them on their way. So
a lot of these people are in this room now, or were a few minutes ago.
Come to the summer school. You will get the opportunity to work with someone established who may well help you on your way. And this is another summer school which is run by the Translators Association in association with the Universities of Westminster and London. That's also in July. This is a bit earlier in July. I'm trying to remember the date, 9th to the 13th. Now, one of the things about this summer school is that there are actually publishers who are providing texts, and we did this last year with a French text, with Gallic Books, who provided a novel and then held a competition, and the winner of the competition ended up with a book contract. So we have information about the summer schools here. The other way to start is to take projects to publishers. If you're starting out as a translator, if you can find an author who hasn't been translated, maybe from a smaller publisher, who's not known here, and take it and convince a publisher by doing a very, very good sample translation, that is also a way of starting. Because, I mean, one of the wonderful things about translation is you don't need a CV as long as your arm. Because it's like being a writer. If you go to a publisher with a good translation, they're not going to ask if you've got this degree or that degree or what else you've done. They will look at the translation, and if it's good, they'll say, yeah, we'd like to work with this person. So, you know, there are ways of doing that if you can come up with a convincing project. And I have actually got some guidelines for that. If anybody wants me to send them, then come up to me afterwards and give me your card, and I'll send you those guidelines. But networking really is the answer.
I would want to say that again in another way, that there are two general things you can do without getting onto an actual program if the programs are full. And one is to be aware of all the things that we do with our partners. For example, Free Word, the Free Word Center has residencies, it has lots and lots of, has an International Translation Day, mentoring scheme. And all of the information on all of these initiatives is on the Free Word site, or the British Centre for Literary Translation site, or the Translators Association site. So it's just there for anybody who is interested. And when you're there, because it is a minority interest. People are not going to be don't go into translation the way they go into banking, and so you end up in a room where people have possibly hybrid backgrounds like you do, because we all do it, because I can tell because I'm looking into your eyes and you're my tribe, yeah? And so you do meet people who are like-minded, maybe out of other literatures, but it's all very fun and interesting. The other thing, general thing, which you probably all have already done, is just be your own scout in the other literature, and in other words, read things because you're interested in the other literature, and be adventurous. Try to find out what are the classics that haven't been published yet, or not for a long time, or the exciting new voices, and so you become an expert through just following your passion, really, and that will be what you'll be depending on as you get into literary translation, and yes, and marry somebody very wealthy. Yeah. I forgot to do that. Yeah. And there's a question up here. Is it? Okay.
Hi. I actually asked Roz about this a bit earlier, but I, through someone I met networking, was approached by an author who wants to self-publish a translation. So he has his text in his language and he wants someone to translate it into English. And I wondered whether you have any advice for people who are approached by individuals rather than publishers about contracts or things you need to check out before you commit.
Over to you, and then I'll add to it.
Yeah, this happens quite a lot, especially if you're translating into English, because a lot of foreign authors become frustrated with the fact that they can't get their book in English, and English is the gateway to the world market, etc. So they think, I know, I'll get my book translated myself, and then it'll be easier to find a publisher. Now, sadly, it doesn't work like that. So when an author approaches a translator thinking this is going to help them, it's more likely to hinder them, because the way it works is if a book's been published in its original language, then it would be that publisher who tries to sell the rights to foreign publishers. So a British publisher being approached by an author who's published in their own language is going to think, well, why isn't their publisher pushing this book? Is it so bad? Is it that it hasn't sold? It's actually going to put them off. So I think that, morally, we have a sort of duty to say to authors, this is not the best way to go about it. But if you still want to go ahead, then I'm happy to do it. The best way is to translate 2 or 3 chapters and provide a synopsis and a report, which would be adequate. I mean, publishers are used to making quite quick decisions. One publisher told me that she published the book on the strength of its first sentence. Another said that when he's presented with a manuscript, he reads until he gets bored, and if it's at the end of the first paragraph, he stops. So most publishers, given a good chunk of a book, are able to make a decision. And then, of course, as a translator, your concern is about getting paid and having a proper contract. Authors don't always know how much it costs, so the first thing you need to do is explain how much it's going to cost and, explain the rationale that the rates are based on per 1,000 words, etc. And if they still want to go ahead after you've given them all those warnings, I mean, they might want to self-publish online or something. You need to have an agreement. I would suggest that you get a 50% fee in advance, as you would with a publisher, the rest on delivery. And you make it clear exactly what you're licensing them to do. Are you licensing them to use your translation for the purposes of finding a publisher? Because if that's the case, you would then make a separate contract with that publisher if they publish your translation, because there are secondary rights, there are all sorts of other issues. You retain the copyright of your translation. If they're going to self-publish, then, you should get royalties. So I would say, proceed with caution and do warn authors that this is not necessarily going to get them, the best possible introduction to an English publisher.
I would also add that the Society of Authors and the Translators Association, which is part of the Society of Authors, is very concerned about self-publishing in general and has developed various projects so that people making inquiries can get very, very good legal advice, and so I would recommend that as well. But again, because I work with a lot of young writers writing in English at Warwick, I'm aware that there's a huge amount going on in what you might call the informal publishing world that's being invented by the younger generation as formal publishing implodes. I hope they didn't hear me. If you're interested in getting things, experimenting and so on, I think it's far better to be working collaboratively and collectively, so that my students at Warwick will, link up with other groups of writers in other countries and initiate experiments that are online. You do still need legal advice for that, but then it's a sort of something you do at the beginning of your career when you're trying to start new initiatives. So you can be adventurous, but don't sign your life away.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you're passionate about something and it's a decision you make. Can I afford the time to do this, knowing that I might not get paid, but it would be good as a starting point, etc. So these decisions are all personal, but you do need to be careful.
Yeah. Any other questions? There's a hand back there. And okay, yes.
Hiya. I was just wondering if you could explain a bit more about the process of obtaining rights. I mean, if you find a book that you want to publish and then you go and approach the publisher or the author, I mean, how does the process usually work? Oh, sorry. That was it.
Okay, well, it's not you as the translator who obtain the rights. So let's say you've got a book that you want to translate. You approach the rights holder, which might be the publisher, it might be the author, and you say, I'm a translator, I'd really like to translate your book. Are the rights free, and are you happy for me to approach publishers? Yes. You then start approaching English publishers, and you find a publisher who's interested in doing the book. It is then up to them to negotiate the rights. You can't translate the book until they've acquired the rights, and then they can commission you to translate it. So in a way, all you need to do is make sure that the rights are free.
I would say that I've never approached a publisher with a project, but I was asked. But the reason I was asked was because I was living in the writing world to start with, and so I would also say that that's another way in. It's just to live by the word, if you like. Work in journalism, work in publishing, be involved in various projects to bring, for example, Turkish literature into this language. You meet all the people who are involved. You might have your pet projects, but they will often have other projects that they need to find a translator for. And if you do a good job for them and help them, then of course they'll say, do you have anything else? So it's just getting into those networks, often by helping people and not just asking for them to give you something.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
One thing that you can do when you're starting out as a way of sort of getting close to that world is offering to be a publisher's reader.
Yeah.
What publishers do when they're offered a foreign book is they will ask somebody to provide a reader's report. Very few English publishers read more than 1 or 2 languages, and even if they do, they are busy people. So what happens when a book is brought to their attention that looks interesting is they will ask for a report. And the people who write publishing reports are people that they trust. So you need to understand how publishers think. You need to understand what their considerations are. And although you might think that it's got to be a good book, they're also looking at the bottom line. They're thinking, who's going to buy this book? How can I sell it? How am I going to be able to get this book into Waterstones? What's the market for it? And there are a number of ways of getting in by offering to read reports, especially if you have an unusual language. I mean, there are lots of people who do reports in the main European languages, but if you have a language that is one of the lesser known languages, then I think a lot of publishers would love to do a book from Estonian or Lithuanian, but they just haven't got any readers and can't be bothered to find them. So that is a way of finding out publishers' tastes and offering something. It's not well paid. It's not a way of making a living, but it's a way of building relationships. And I think a lot of it is about building relationships of trust and working with publishers in that way.
I would say that one of the, when you're getting into a network, one of the best questions to ask yourself is how can I be of assistance rather than what can they do for me. So I have a former student who was here earlier on, and she just said that she'd gone to the gatekeepers session yesterday, and somebody said, I have a hard time dealing with Russian publishers because I don't know how the Russian publishing industry works. And she says, well, I do, because I worked in the Russian publishing industry for several years after the degree that I did with her. And I said, well, go over and talk to them. And of course, yes, they want some help.
Yeah,
and
brilliant.
And of course, that starts the trust relationship. So it's good to ask yourselves right now, what do you have to offer that many people might be hard to find? And the relationship always goes much better if you make the first generous act, if you like.
And if you are asked to write a report, ask the publisher to give you a sample good report, because it's not something you're taught. It's not something you learn at school or at university. And it's not like writing an essay, a literary criticism essay. And publishers have stashes of reports, good reports. They say, send me some examples of some reports so that I can see what it is you want. Yeah?
Yeah.
Because there is an art to it.
There was one, and then behind there. Yeah. Okay.
Hello. This was just a little follow-up to my previous question. I understand that once you are, hopefully, in negotiation with a publisher to translate a book for them, you can do a rapid application to join the Translators Association, who can then advise you on contractual matters.
Very good point.
Would that also apply if you were trying to negotiate a private contract, as it were, with an individual?
Do you know?
I think it probably wouldn't, but actually after our conversation earlier, I made a note to see if we can get some guidelines, because it is a question that comes up quite a lot. I've been approached by an author, so it might be an idea if we drew up a sort of sample contractual agreement, because it's not really a contract at that point. So I think it's something we need to take further.
I mean, I would also just, when you have your first proper contract, then I really, really recommend joining the Translators Association for the contract service that you just mentioned. And I found this out to my cost because I, as a novelist and writer of nonfiction, I had my agent, and my agent would negotiate all these things. But agents generally won't touch translation. And so I've handled all my translation contracts myself, and I have done such a bad job. So if I had to do it all over again, I would, I would have gotten in touch with the contract department 10 years ago. So, any other questions? Yes, did you want? Okay, and then we'll come to you. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. Yeah.
I'm just wondering a little bit about the payment in advance before you begin working, because I recall before hearing that you should get 50%, and I've signed my first contract recently, which is really
Very
exciting.
good.
But I forget exactly how we got where we got, but I'm getting 30% in advance before we begin work, and then the rest on delivery. How normal is that? Should I have held out for 50%?
I have something to say.
It depends. It's negotiable. I mean, I'm currently working on a book where the publisher's paying me monthly. I'm getting 12 monthly payments. It's all negotiable. Depends how much, how big the book. Sometimes you can do 30, 40. Ideally 50 and 50, but it's negotiable.
I know that the Translators Association recommends the 50-50, but the contract I signed most recently, it's a small publisher, wonderful New York-based small publisher, does beautiful books, and they asked if we could go to 3 payments because they have to put in an application to TEDA, which is the cultural organization that gives grants in Turkey, and they're going to have to wait a very, very long time to get that money. And so this is a publishing house that actually puts translators' names on the front cover. so you want that. A larger publisher I won't name was supposed to pay me in 2 installments, and the second installment was due on acceptance and delivery. Delivery was in September. I have yet to be paid.
Yeah, I think we should say something about this word acceptance, because contracts often say payment on acceptance. Now, sometimes there's a delay. The publishing house decides to delay the publication of your translation, so it's going to sit on someone's desk for 6 months after you've delivered it, because they actually forgot to tell you they've delayed publication. And so they're not going to accept it because they're not going to read it for another 6 months. What we normally recommend is say payment on delivery, but making it clear that you will be available to work with the copy editor and discuss any queries on the translation. And if they've commissioned you on the basis of a sample that you've done or your work, then what they've seen is what they're going to get. So there shouldn't be any question mark over the quality of the final thing. But do try to avoid signing a contract that says payment on acceptance.
But the advice you get from the Translators Association is very, very specific. It's point by point, and it's based on a lot of experience. So, I should have asked them. You had a question? Yes? Okay.
Just a little bit more. Okay. The contract that I've signed, it's pending the publisher obtaining funding, grant funding, and so I think that this could go on a while, and I want to go and tell them about the new pen grant, for instance. But do you have anything to say about that? I'd be curious, because I'm kind of wondering if it is ever going to happen or not. And
Inshallah.
Yeah. At least they've been honest with you. There's some funding applications you have to submit the agreement with the translator. What some publishers do is say, well, if we get the funding, we'll pay you this, but if we don't, we can't pay you, or we'll pay you something much less. So I think if you've signed a contract, but you can't start work yet. So you can't start work until they know if they've got the funding. So you have to be prepared for the fact that they might not get the funding and it might not happen. blue
but,
shirt here.
but stay hopeful.
Yeah.
For your first novel that you translate, is it better to go for some sort of serious literature or just something that's going to sell, something that's marketable, like airport fiction, you might say? Or
Well, I would say.
or something that you really love? Or
It depends on what language. Scandinavian
German and
language.
Russian?
Scandinavian language. No, that's
German and
crime.
Russian?
Yeah, as you say. German. What would you say?
I think I'd like to tell you a story. When I was starting out, I went to the Frankfurt Book Fair, just like you guys have come to the London Book Fair today, with this idea that, okay, book fairs are where all the publishers are, and I'm going to go and meet all these publishers of great literature, and I'm going to tell them that I'm a great translator, and they're going to give me work. And completely oblivious of the fact that these publishers were much too busy doing mega deals to talk to the likes of me. But because I was there, I started talking to people on stands, and I met a guy on what was the Collins in those days stand, who was the cookery editor. And he was a very nice guy, and we had a very nice chat, and I gave him my card, and off I went. And I went home, and I never did get to meet the big publisher that I was trying to meet. And then a few months later, I moved house, and so I sent moving cards to everybody I'd ever met in publishing. And my moving card landed on the desk of this very nice cookery editor who I chatted to the same day as an Italian cookery book that he needed a translator for. And there was my card, and there was this book, and he couldn't quite remember what language I did, but he rang me up and said, hello, his name was Robin. This is Robin here. I've got this Italian cookery book. Would you like to translate it for me? Now, I sort of knew Italian, but I did know how to cook, because cooking was something I did all the time. So out of my mouth came this great big yes. And I translated this Italian cookery book. And then after that, he passed my name on to just about everyone in cookery. And for 10 years, I got all these cookery books. Now, those cookery books actually kept me going while I was launching myself as a literary translator. If I hadn't had those, I'd probably have had to give up and get a day job. And one of the things it made me realize is that because cooking was something I did as a leisure activity, I actually had expert knowledge that somebody who doesn't cook doesn't have. But I sort of took it for granted because I cooked. That's what I did. It's easy. And it made me realize that we all have all these hidden areas of expertise that we take for granted. Now, if you think about your lives and your hobbies and your interests, you will probably have areas of expertise that you've never linked up with translation. I had never, ever thought of linking cookery with Italian and translation. But they came together. So if you have a sport, if you play a musical instrument, if you have any kind of hobby, maybe gardening, knitting, if you love pets, anything like that, you are an expert. You have a whole vocabulary. If you like sewing or knitting, there is a huge vocabulary. Somebody who doesn't do that cannot translate those things. And I would say, start there. Because, you learn an awful lot about translation from doing what might seem to be something quite mundane. Recipes, there's an awful lot of sameness. But it's also quite creative, and it enabled me to sort of learn how to pace myself, how to work as a freelancer. So you might want to just think about things that you've never thought about before in connection with translation, and you are an expert in those things, and look at books in that area.
I would add to that saying that my degree is in English literature and English and comparative literature, and the books that I ended up translating by Orhan Pamuk were very much in the tradition in which I had been formed as a novelist, as a reader, and then as a translator, and that I also learned a lot from the act of translation, which went into my other books. So, but generally, I would advise a two-track strategy. One is that central thing: English literature, comparative literature. What are the great books? Trying to be involved in that. And I actually was involved with introducing Orhan to this literary community for years and years before he asked me to translate a book, because that was just my interest in getting him these books readers. So it's kind of very high motive. But the first translation I actually did was when I was working as a lowly secretary at Amnesty International in the mid-70s. And there was somebody in the executive committee there who's a Turk whose wife had been in political prison and had written a book, and he wanted it to come out in English. And so he said, would you give it a try? And so I did translate that book. One of the things about translation, it is such slow reading. It was a wonderful book as well. And I felt I'd been in that prison. I thought very much about what she and the other people were going through. And that began my lifelong interest in human rights. So just if their opportunities turn up, if they seem right, just give it a try. And you find out later why you're good at something. Yes? Yeah.
Also, I think what we're talking about is empathy. I think, to translate a book, you have to love it. You're going to be living with that book for months, and if you don't like it, it becomes like a prison sentence. So I think to say, well, strategically, what's the best kind of book to do, it's not a good idea. It's find a book that you love, because passion comes through when you're talking to publishers, etc.
Or something that will be interesting and fun. But I think you can do the very, very serious things, and then try the things that you wouldn't have thought of, but seem like good ideas. I think we've run out of time, unfortunately. But thank you very, very much for coming here and for the questions, and good luck.